Thank you for joining and welcome to another consultation, an open forum discussion with the lessons from the accountability mechanism stakeholders of the Asian Development Bank. This consultation forms part of the stakeholder engagement that supports the Safeguard Policy Review and Update process, or the SPRU, as you may hear us refer to it as. It's nice to see so many colleagues joining and showing interest in the accountability mechanisms issue, and a warm welcome, and again, to new colleagues and those joining for the first time, a very good day to you all. My name is Azim Manji. I am your consultation moderator for this session. This is our 9th thematic consultation topic or theme so far, and this is the first in a series of discussions on the accountability mechanisms. In today's consultation, we are joined not only by Director of Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department, Mr. Bruce Dunn, but also by Mr. Warren Evans, Special Project Facilitator from the Office of the Special Project Facilitator, as well as Ms. Elisa Bebet-Gozun, Chair of the Compliance Review Panel, or CRP. We have today at least 60 individual participants from across various ADB countries, including Armenia, Bangladesh, Georgia, India, Nepal, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Uzbekistan, as well as those joining from other countries, including Hungary, Indonesia, Japan, Philippines, Sweden, and the United States. In this consultation, the Office of the Special Project Facilitator and the Compliance Review Panel of the ADB will present the main feedback issues received and the relationship of these comments and feedback of relevance to the Safeguards Policy Update. From the presentations, we're hoping participants like you will share insights on the potential gaps of the provisions and implementation of the 2009 and previous policy, as well as propose recommendations to ensure the strengthening of the forthcoming or future revised policy. Comments received from this consultation and thereafter will inform the revision of ADB's safeguards policy. Before I call upon our speakers, here's a few gentle reminders. As all stakeholders and participants have consented when joining, ADB is recording this session for the purposes of preparing a summary of the meeting. Please join from a quiet, distraction-free area. Please turn off your microphone when you're not speaking, and during the Q&A session, when Iram invites you to do so, you may ask questions either by typing them into the chat box in any one of the languages we have simultaneous interpretation for, including English, or through raising your hand. You'll be asked to unmute yourself and turn on your camera so you can ask your question live. Please remember to be respectful to your other colleagues joining, and we will manage the time to keep within our schedule. IT support is provided. If you run into technical difficulties, you may ask for IT support by typing your question or query or issue into the chat box. As we're all joining by Zoom, here's a few guidance remarks when using the important Zoom buttons. Today, we have simultaneous interpretation available in Hindi, Russian, and Urdu. To access the simultaneous interpretations feature, click on the globe icon found on the lower part of your screen and select the preferred language. Please remember to press the mute original audio button if you're using the simultaneous interpretation function in Hindi, Russian, or Urdu, so you can hear your interpreter clearly. I can now hear some background noise, so may I please request that you mute your original audio and all participants mute themselves when not speaking. We also ask you that you use your proper name in Zoom for our documentation. To change your name on Zoom, click on the Participants button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and then on the right-hand side of your screen, look for your own name. When you found your own name, click on the More button on the right-hand side of your name. Then click on the Rename button. Here, you should type in your name, the agency that you represent, and then click OK. If you wish to send a message, question, or share feedback, click on the Chat button. If you wish to comment or raise a question live in the language you prefer, click on the smile icon or the Reactions button, and then click on the Raise Hand emoji. To speak, when invited to do so, unmute yourself and click on the microphone icon. To show your video, click on the video icon. We value diverse and informed feedback from our wide range of stakeholders, so please allow me to restate ADB's commitment to meaningful consultations. We encourage all stakeholders to articulate your inputs and concerns during this consultation. These will be recorded and documented during each event.
So the recordings and documentation allow the ADB to review, consider, and respond to, if necessary, any comments and inputs made. Background materials on the thematic areas have been released in preparation for the consultation and dialogues. All types of feedback are welcome, but this will not be used for the purposes of retaliation, abuse, or any other kind of discrimination. If you have any issues or concerns on the disclosure, recording, confidentiality, potential risks, abuse, or any kind of discrimination during the course of the consultations, or wish to exclude yourself from the recording of events and discussion, please get in touch with us, the Secretariat, through safeguardsupdate@adb.org. Next slide, please. So here's the rundown of our session. We'll start with Director Bruce Dunn of the Safeguards Division of the Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department, so that in addition to welcome remarks, he will provide us an overview of the safeguard policy and review and update process. He will then be followed by Dr. Warren Evans, the Special Project Facilitator of the Office of the Special Project Facilitator, and Ms. Bibeth Guzon, the Chair of the Compliance Review Panel, to introduce the accountability mechanism in Asian Development Bank. And then we have a break. Then we'll begin with the moderated discussion led by Ms. Irom Azan, who is the advisor of the Office of the Compliance Review Panel. Then we'll have a event evaluation, which we invite you to join us in. Then we'll have a wrap-up from Director Dunn. So on that note, let's begin with the welcome remarks with Director Dunn. Bruce?
Thank you very much, Jelson, and thank you for coming in when we had that slight technical problem with Mr. Azim's connection. So good day, welcome, and thank you to all of the participants joining today. It's a great pleasure to be here and to open this regional consultation today on lessons learned from ADB's accountability mechanism. This is the 10th thematic consultation topic that we have held so far as part of the preparation of ADB's Safeguard Policy Update, the update of the 2009 Safeguard Policy Statement, or SPS for short. Very pleased to see many people joining this session today. I think we had 36 registered participants that we hope will be able to join throughout the course of this call, registered from about 14 countries, mostly from South and Central and West Asia, but also other regions. But of course, wherever you're joining from, we greatly appreciate your time to be able to provide your inputs into this important policy update process. Now, I see that many of you have actually joined previous consultations, which we always value to have you come back and to continue the dialogue. But of course, we always do have some people are joining from the first time. So let me just provide a little bit of context there. ADB has launched an update of the SPS from August 2020. And this followed an evaluation on the effectiveness of the SPS by ADB's independent evaluation department. And that study had recommended that we should update and modernize the policy. In addition, there was recommendations that we should strengthen our own internal institutional arrangements, as well as staffing and skills and capacity and guidance. Management endorsed all of those recommendations, and now we're looking at taking those forward comprehensively as part of this update process. The process itself is expected to be implemented over about a 2.5-year period. And at this stage, we're looking at the target date for the policy approval by March 2023. So it's about a year ahead of us. And the regional consultations are a very important part of this process. They allow us to get feedback from you on various analytical studies that we've been producing, and they feed directly into the policy update process itself. But they are one part only. We're also complementing these regional consultations by what we're planning to implement throughout this year, country level consultations, which will include consultations with a selected range of ADB's developing member countries. And that will also include dedicated sessions in each of those countries for civil society. We'll also be holding consultations with project affected people. And on various topics, we're also having some focus groups that we're convening to bring in technical expertise to guide us on certain topics. Now for today, as we've said, we're focusing on lessons learned from the accountability mechanism. And this really is a very important topic for us. The accountability mechanism, just to introduce it to you, was first established in 2003, and then it was updated in 2012. And this is designed to provide an independent, transparent, and responsive forum for people that may be affected by ADB-assisted projects to voice their concerns or complaints. The mechanism helps to ensure compliance with ADB's operational policies and procedures, and this includes our safeguards. And it covers, of course, the design, processing, and implementation of those ADB-assisted projects. There are two main functions of the mechanism. First, a problem-solving function, which is led by the Special Project Facilitator. And then secondly, a compliance review function, which is primarily implemented by an independent compliance review panel. And as you've seen from the agenda today, we're very pleased that we're joined by the heads of these two functions. Firstly, Mr. Warren Evans, who is the Special Project Facilitator, and then Ms. Babette Gozon, who is the chair of the Compliance Review Panel. And they'll be presenting to you in a few moments with further information about the accountability mechanism, and there's also a short video to introduce that. But importantly, they'll be going into some of the key lessons learned from past projects and complaints. Now, this is actually a shared interest. From the policy formulation team, we of course want to learn very comprehensively from any of the past projects that have had implementation challenges. And it's actually something that we review on a regular basis. In fact, there is a process built into the mechanism itself, into the accountability mechanism, where every 3 years, the officers of the accountability mechanism, along with ADB's independent evaluation department, plus the Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department, collaborate on preparing joint learning reports on the implementation of the accountability mechanism. The last one of these was published in the beginning of 2019. So there's a number of important recommendations from that last report. But also the accountability mechanism officers themselves produce their own independent lessons learned reports. And you're going to be hearing from some of those, and they're also published on our website for further information. But of course, many of you that are joining today from civil societies or civil society representatives or from communities have your own experiences. You've got your own experience with policy implementation. You have got experiences on what has worked directly and what are some of the challenges that are facing affected people. And for some of you, you may have been involved in actually helping affected people to deal directly with those concerns, or preparing complaints, or assisting the affected people to actually submit those complaints through to the accountability mechanism. So, your own views are going to be extremely important to us, supplementing the lessons learned reports that we have from our own teams. So we really do hope that, through this sharing of experiences that we're bringing together today, that we will have some important recommendations to feed into both existing policy implementation as well as the design of the new policy itself. So, thank you very much in advance for your time and effort. Now, finally, I would just like to note that today's discussions are intended to focus on the update of the Safeguard Policy Statement. And while we welcome, of course, a range of comments and views on wider issues around safeguards and accountability, I also just wanted to be clear at the beginning that today's session is not focused on updating the accountability mechanism. This is something that is potentially going to be considered at a later date by ADB's board after looking at the shape of the new safeguards policy. But there's not yet been a firm decision or date made on that. I just wanted to frame that so that we can stay focused on this important task of updating the Safeguard Policy Statement. Now, with that, again, thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to having further discussions after the presentation. So let me now hand over to Warren Evans, ADB Special Project Facilitator, for the next part of the session. Over to you, Warren. Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce. And like Bruce, I'd like to welcome all of you and look forward to a lively discussion this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you are. So can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, we're going to show a quick video here that summarizes the accountability mechanism policy and the offices, how we work in ADB. And then I'll go through a few slides that focus more on the problem-solving process that my office, the Office of the Special Project Facilitator, manages, and then Babette will take over for the remainder of the presentation. So could we show the video, please?
The Asian Development Bank is dedicated to reduce poverty in Asia and the Pacific and promote social and economic development through loans, grants, technical assistance, and equity investments. Through its products and services, ADB expects to contribute significantly to sustainable and inclusive development in Asia and the Pacific. As such, ADB works to ensure compliance with ADB's operational policies and procedures during the design, processing, and implementation of ADB-assisted projects. These policies provide social and environmental safeguards against involuntary resettlement, environmental degradation, and such other adverse effects that may be the unintended results of development projects. ADB strives to ensure that the projects it finances will not result in any direct and material harm to people. Audit, supervision, quality control, and evaluation systems are employed to prevent and address most issues that occur in planning and implementation. However, despite all preventive measures, there are instances where complaints may be raised by people affected by a project. To address these concerns, a project-level grievance redress mechanism is in place on all ADB-assisted projects as the primary venue by which complainants may seek relief. Complaints may also be brought to the attention of ADB's operations departments, which address concerns through problem-solving and compliance efforts. In addition, ADB instituted an accountability mechanism with a compliance review function as a platform of last resort to seek redress. ADB's accountability mechanism provides an independent, transparent, and responsive forum by which project-affected people may seek redress when directly and materially harmed or likely to be harmed by an ADB-assisted project. ADB's accountability mechanism has two functions: problem-solving and compliance review. Problem-solving, conducted by the Special Project Facilitator, uses non-formal, flexible, and consensus-based approaches to resolve a complaint. In contrast, a compliance review may be requested only when the probable cause of harm can be attributed to non-compliance by ADB with its operational policies and procedures. The alleged non-compliance by ADB is investigated by the Compliance Review Panel, a fact-finding body on behalf of the ADB Board of Directors. A compliance review does not investigate a borrowing country and its executing or implementing agencies or a private sector client. Rather, compliance review is a corrective measure aimed to address issues that may ensue from non-compliance with ADB's operational policies and procedures in ADB-assisted projects. With the active participation of all stakeholders, the accountability mechanism becomes an instrument to institute improvements within ADB systems, from lessons learned into compliance review to enable ADB to work more effectively towards sustainable and inclusive development.
Thank you. So before we go forward with the next slides, I wanted to just point out a few things that I think are important as background information. The first is that ADB is a bit different than most of the other multilateral development banks or MDBs in that while Babette, who you will meet very soon, and the Compliance Review Panel and the Office of the Compliance Review Panel report to the board, my office, I actually report to the president. So all of the other MDBs, both the compliance review and the dispute resolution or problem solving function, are reporting to the board. ADB is set up a little bit different. Similar to that, I think that it's worth noting that we decided a couple of years ago that it was really important that the independent accountability mechanism work together with the safeguards team, with Bruce Dunn's team and the Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department and others, to really reach out to concerned stakeholders jointly as opposed to separately, because our objective really is to improve the development effectiveness, and we decided that it was more effective for us to do that jointly than separately. So that's one of the reasons why we're having this consultation now on the accountability mechanism. The second point I wanted to mention is that complainants on an ADB project, it's their decision as to whether they select the problem-solving process, which my team manages, or the compliance review process. It's their choice. We don't make that choice. We advise them on what the differences are, but we don't make the choice. If they decide on the problem-solving process, then they do have the option, if they're not satisfied with the progress or with the way that's done, they have the option of opting out of that process and requesting compliance review. And as the video noted, the compliance review process, and as Babette will explain, looks internally at compliance with our policies. But it's up to the complainant to make that decision. If they choose compliance review at the outset, they cannot then go back to problem solving. So that's the second point. And then finally, I'd like to just point out that if a complainant requests problem solving, we focus on the issues that the complainants have raised. We focus on the direct harm which they have raised as risks or actual harm to them in trying to resolve the complaint, to facilitate resolution of the disputes. Whereas if a request is made for compliance review, the compliance review panel looks at the entire scope of the project and all issues related to that. So there's a very, very different range of scope in our functions. So with that background, I just thought it would be worth adding that background before going on, because I think it's important to make these issues clear. So what are the main issues of complaints that we receive? The number one complaint relates to resettlement and compensation. Either improper approaches, inadequate compensation, missing land, missing assets, etc. Virtually every complaint we get includes a complaint about inadequate consultation and information disclosure. On the environmental side, most of the issues that we get are around noise and vibration, and they relate to infrastructure to a large extent. And then finally, on many cases, the complainants point out that there's been inadequate baseline studies done, whether it's socioeconomic or environmental, during project preparation. Next slide, please. We have experienced in the last few years a fairly substantial increase in the number of complaints. The complaints, as the video mentioned, the complaints go to the complaint receiving officer, and when the complaint receiving officer decides that they have reached the bar for information required to decide whether to forward it to either the SPF or the CRP, depending on the choice of the complainant, that process is followed. And you can see from this that the last 4 years, we've had a fairly dramatic increase in the number of complaints. Next slide, please. The one question that often comes up is on the eligibility of complaints. And you can see from this slide that, for example, in 2021, of the complaints that were received, 14 were ineligible. These are complaints that were actually forwarded to either SPF or CRP. The primary reason for ineligibility is that they have not attempted to resolve the issues with the operational department of ADB. So the policy, the accountability mechanism policy, requires that before, unless there are extenuating circumstances, before the SPF or the CRP find a complaint eligible, the complainants need to have attempted to resolve the issues with our operational department. Now, when that happens and we make a complaint ineligible, determine a complaint is ineligible, it doesn't mean that we just pass it on. We actually have an in-depth dialogue with the operational department and sometimes with the executing agency about what they will do to try and resolve that complaint. And then we monitor, we reach an agreement on a course of actions, and then we monitor that is done. And if the complainants later are not satisfied with that, the actions being taken, then they can come back to us and submit a new request for consideration for eligibility. Next slide, please. we've had about 140 complaints over the last 20 years. We've gathered a lot of lessons, and so the next few slides will focus largely on those lessons learned. Next slide, please. Sorry, the lighting in my room just changed dramatically with the sun going down. So we in OSPF, we have primarily focused on whether grievance redress mechanisms work. And in most of the cases that are eligible for OSPF, the grievance redress mechanism has not been very successful. And so we've undertaken a number of case studies to understand what works, what doesn't work, why, and so on. So some of the key lessons learned are that the success of a grievance redress mechanism depends largely on the consultation with affected people during project preparation and implementation, and increasingly during implementation, because often the project affected people really don't think that much about the project until it is being implemented, and they see they see right in front of them the potential impacts on them. So consultation is always a key issue and needs to be strengthened. In many cases, there's a need to delegate authority to handle some complaints to field staff. And in some of our developing member countries, they have done this, where the contractors, for example, or the local government unit has a much greater authority to resolve issues so that they don't have to, so complainants don't have to go to higher levels of government. And that is a key to catching complaints early and addressing those complaints effectively. Using techniques of social mobilization, particularly with community liaison experts to really enhance the understanding, the awareness and understanding of potentially affected people, project affected people, that there is a grievance redress mechanism available to them. If they're not aware of it, then they're not going to access it. So awareness is a key issue. And related to that is having effective manuals that are understandable, that affected people can access and understand what the process is to file a grievance and what they can expect in that process. Next slide, please. The other lessons, in many cases, a local government or a district government actually has a fairly good, effective way to deal with complaints from communities and local citizens. It makes much more sense in many cases to integrate the grievance redress mechanism at the project level with that local system than to set up something in parallel. And so that's something that needs to be analyzed during project preparation. Is there a grievance redress process that can be utilized, that's already in existence, that can be utilized for project affected people? If not, then you need to come up with a project level GRM. In many cases, we found that the handling of complaints is quite loose. There's no formal complaint registration process. The tracking is not very effective. And this is extremely important for the project affected people, for the complainants, the people who go to the GRM, for them to feel confident that there will be actions taken on their behalf. Related to this is training. We find over and over again that a GRM is established, but we don't have a cadre of people who really understand what their job is. And they tend to go back to kind of the old-fashioned, we're the government, we know what we're doing, we'll tell you what's best, as opposed to listening and trying to come up with approaches to resolve the issues. So training is absolutely critical. And then for training and experience sharing is critical. That's one of the reasons we do a lot of case studies on GRMs in the cases that we have, to try and be able to share those lessons with others. And hopefully, if you're interested in this, you'll look at the case studies that we have published, including videos. At the agency level, and for ADB in the project preparation level, if there's not a budget allocated for this, then it's probably not going to work very well. So like other things, there has to be a budget for both staff training and to make sure that you have an effective GRM mechanism in place, the tracking and so on. And then finally, the need for contingency funds in case complaints and issues arise at a later stage in a project when perhaps there's no budget left in the project for resolving those issues. So having a contingency fund for that purpose. Next slide, please. And I'm going to now ask my colleague, Babette, to take over from here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Warren. Good day, everyone. So based on the cases that we have handled, we've identified certain key lessons. First of those is the importance of establishing comprehensive baseline data. We know that baseline data informs the project planning, the design, all the way to monitoring the effectiveness of whatever mitigative measures have been identified. But we want to highlight here is the importance of comprehensive socioeconomic conditions of the affected communities. This will ensure that we adequately determine the impact of the project on them. And at the same time, down the line, we will have an empirical basis for us to say that the people, the affected communities, are actually better off because of the project, or at the very least, are not worse off. The next lesson, next please, is on due diligence. And here we want to highlight two things. One is that the capacity assessment of the borrower to actually implement the ADB safeguards policies is very critical. Unless we do this, we cannot ensure that it will actually be implemented. We saw this in two instances in the Cambodia Railway project, where the project involved resettlement of over 800 families. And the one in charge of the resettlement was a newly created commission composed of 3 non-technical people. We also saw this in the case of Sri Lanka's Southern Transport Development Project, which was the first time that the government was actually implementing an expressway over a 26-kilometer area. And the limited capacity of the Roads Department, the Roads Development Authority was actually identified, but no interventions were done. So it's very important that that assessment is done and the appropriate measures to build the capacity to train those who will actually implement it so that they can do it well in accordance with the policies. Next, of course, is also an assessment of the gaps, sorry, not yet, the gaps and the safeguards policy of the bank and the local, as well as the legal framework, legal and institutional framework of the country. And it's worth exploring the participation of affected persons, not just in designing the project, but also in implementing and monitoring it for stronger safeguard measures. Next. The third lesson is on allocation of adequate resources for safeguard the whole range of what needs to be done in safeguards. And that includes appointing or designating the skilled staff for safeguards implementation and to make sure that these resources are not just front-loaded during project design and processing, but are actually there all throughout the entire project cycle. Of course, to maximize the use of these resources, it's very important that things are done right from the very beginning, and that can be done if the concerned technical staff is actually there. Like if it's going to require a resettlement, then there has to be a resettlement specialist as part of the team. And then, of course, have more sustainable capacity building measures. Next is focus on participation. We need to make sure, next slide please, that we have constructive and meaningful participation of all of the project stakeholders. That includes the affected persons themselves. You cannot have meaningful participation or consultation if you don't know who are those affected by the project. We saw this, for example, in Georgia Sustainable Urban Transport Improvement Program, where the visually impaired were actually missed. And also in the India Tatamundra project, where some fisher folks who were affected were also missed. If they are missed, then we're unable to identify the impacts of the project on them and integrate their concerns into the project itself. And for meaningful and constructive participation to happen, there must be a continuous flow of information, up-to-date information, back and forth, not just one way, so that we could actually enhance the project design and benefits. And this can even be provided, and we've seen this, through inputs of affected people themselves. In Georgia, the visually impaired gave recommendations such as the setting up of more traffic lights with audible signals, clear markings of pedestrian lane, more measures to reduce the traffic, which then the government, the borrower actually implemented, speed control measures and the like. And while there are minimum standards for what meaningful consultation is, there is always room to customize this based on actually what the project needs. And lastly, the key lesson that we've seen is that it's important to frame the compliance review as an instrument, a tool to actually improve ADB's development effectiveness. Well, instead of focusing on the investigation alone, it's important to see that we are actually implementing a policy of ADB so that we can contribute to the development effectiveness of the bank and also build its own capacity. So we should focus instead on the objectives of the compliance review, which is really to improve the project design, implementation, and monitoring, and contribute to institutional learning. And we have to do compliance review, promote it and do it, not just by ourselves. The CRP is independent, we report to the board, but we are not isolated. We need to do the compliance review independently, but as a collaborative effort among the different project partners, ADB management, the borrower, the complainants, the affected communities, the NGOs, so that we can actually optimize project outcomes. Thank you, and I look forward to a constructive, a fruitful discussion with all of you. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that, Babette, and thank you, Warren, as well, for providing us. Thank you both for providing us with the clarity, the feedback and processes of the Compliance Review Panel, the CRP, and the Office of the Special Project Facilitator, and the differences between what Warren's office does and what Babette's office does. And thank you also, Bruce, Director Bruce Dunn, for framing and contextualizing this discussion. A reminder once again that these consultations are being recorded and will be distributed. If you have any reservations or concerns about the recording or the subsequent distribution of the recording, please refer to the email address or please contact the Secretariat on the email address that's being put in the chat box now. We hope that we can get further feedback from you on what the ADB should consider in these general policy topics and areas during the facilitated Q&A session. The session will run for about 75 minutes after a brief 5-minute break, but a reminder that if we need to go beyond the 75 minutes, there is, of course, some flexibility in that. With that, let's pause for a 5-minute break. Before we actually do pause, can I please invite you to think about our poll evaluation, which we will conduct a little bit later on, but just to think about the options and the possibilities and the opportunities for how these engagements can be improved. If you have some ideas on how to improve the level of engagement, how the feedback can be better incorporated into the forthcoming SPS review, and how these consultations can be more effective, please hold on to those thoughts. And when we ask you to put into the Menti app your comments and feedback, please give us some concrete ideas, 3, 4, or 5 sentences as you wish, on how to improve these consultations. We will also have a Zoom poll after the Q&A session, which will ask you about how effective this consultation was and how it responded to your needs. When we return from the 5-minute break, we will start the Q&A session with Ms. Iram Hassan from the Office of the Special Project Facilitator. But right now, we're going to take a brief break. When you hear the music die down and conclude, that will be an indication to you to return to your screens. We also have, as you can see in the top right-hand side of your screen, a countdown timer. And when that countdown timer reaches 0, you'll also know that it's time to return to your screens. So with that, we'll leave you and hope to conclude in 5 minutes. Thank you and see you soon. Thank you very much, and a warm welcome back to everybody. Just before we get into the question and answer session, I'd just like to say that I would like to introduce Iram Hassan. I said that Iram was originally from the Office of the Special Project Facilitator, and apologies for that, Iram. Iram is actually housed in Warren's office, which is the Office of the Compliance Review Panel. So with that, let me turn it over to you, Iram, and a reminder to stakeholders that they can type or raise their questions in any of the languages we have simultaneous interpretation today for, which is Hindi, Urdu, and Russian. If you are going to speak in one of those three languages or a language other than English, please remember to select, using the globe icon at the bottom of your screen, the appropriate language, and then click on mute original audio so that we can have the audio of the interpreter and we do not hear your voice in your original language. So with that, I turn it over to you, please, Iram.
Thank you very much, Azim. Hello, everyone. My name is Iram Hassan, as Azim just mentioned. I work as an advisor to the Office of the Compliance Review Panel. I closely work with Warren Evans, but I directly work with Bebet Gozon, and you have heard from both of them. So the purpose of today's session, just a few reminders to kickstart the conversation. Today's consultations are not about accountability mechanism. They are particularly about the safeguards policy statement of the Asian Development Bank. However, because safeguard policy statement covers a huge range of issues, and including the issues relating to the accountability of the bank, which accountability mechanism offices handle. So that is why we thought that this session can be dedicated to safeguard policy statement related challenges, issues, feedback that closely relates to accountability. So, so that was my first point, because you just heard from both the chairs of respective offices of accountability mechanisms. So I just wanted to remind you that this is about safeguards relating to accountability mechanism, number one. Number two is that we really appreciate and looking forward to a very frank discussion, because unless we hear from you very, very frankly and really your comments and feedback, we will not be able to really go ahead with a meaningful policy update. So your feedback means a lot for the update. So I would request that speak to us from your heart and freely. Number three, just the logistics reminder, you can raise hand and I'll give you the floor to introduce yourself by just stating your name and institution and then ask the question. And then I will direct the question to anyone who can best answer your question and address your issue. Or you can type your question in the chat box. There is a lot of people, team helping me in making sure that I do not miss any questions. So I'm simultaneously looking at a few screens to make sure that I cover all the questions. With that, let me open up the floor. Please jump in, ask the question, and we take it from there. I can also, I mean, help you direct the conversation, but let's see if someone is bold enough to raise the first hand. Our consultations with CSOs is never dull. Anyone from our colleagues from BIC, Forum, CHRD? I'm remembering my biology teacher who used to put us on spot by saying, Iram, you were asking something. So, any colleagues?
I think I'll step in on behalf of NGO Forum on ADB. My name is Ryan Hassan.
Hi, Ryan. Can you turn on your screen as well? I mean, video as well.
Well, unfortunately, the internet is really bad. and the bandwidth is going to get affected.
That's-
So I'll just shoot the question, and basically it's a general view over the stakeholder engagement process so far on SPS. We've seen the discussion around various thematic safeguard components, right? Cultural heritage, we've looked at issues such as resettlement, we've looked at newer issues such as labor and gender. So my question is, when it comes down to the potential scope and width of the accountability mechanism as it stands now, it's looking at the 2009 policy with the 3 pillars, right? And it was quite easy for us to identify compliance and non-compliance issues to the SPS 2009 because explicitly the pillars were there and the policy language corresponding to resettlement to environment and IPs were there. Now, when we're looking at a shift in the, I guess, in the overall theme, it's multiplying. There are 16, 17 themes being proposed. There are comparisons being drawn on performance standards of other MFIs. I think it begs for us as civil society to ask the question, what would that mean in terms of identifying violations on each of these newer themes, which would trigger the accountability mechanism? And for us, that's a big question mark at the moment. We are looking for tangible hooks around the question of compliance and non-compliance when it comes to the new themes. So any light on that to kick off the conversation would be great.
This is a brilliant question, Ryan, and thank you, yeah, as someone said in the chat, for breaking the ice. While I'm really feeling the urge to respond, but I would hand over, be quiet, be a moderator, and Warren or Bruce, would you want to come in to answer the question? Maybe Bruce. Warren, please go ahead.
No, I look, Bruce might have a response as well. I think this is the $1 million question, and it is the question that will drive. The answer to that question is what will drive the decision as to whether to have a review and update of the accountability mechanism policy. My own view is, as somebody who's been around for a long time, is that we will have to take a hard look at the expansion of the kinds of issues that could raise, particularly not just compliance issues, because it's not just about compliance, but will increase the availability of the independent accountability mechanism to complainants in terms of the range of issues that they will be more comfortable to raise because of the potential compliance issues. So I think as we expand the scope of safeguards, and I'll use it as an example, the grievance redress mechanism. The grievance redress mechanism was introduced in 2009 as a very good idea, and an appropriate measure for helping project affected people resolve issues, but we weren't prepared for it. We see over and over again that at the project level, depending on the country and the sector, in many cases the grievance redress mechanism doesn't work very well, even though it is required. And so we've got to be thinking about all these new areas of compliance and accountability, in addition to the ones that we've got already. So in my mind, Ryan, that's the $1 million question. And I don't think we have, I mean, in my view, we don't have an answer yet. I think we've got to see what comes out of the safeguard policy update, and I'll leave that with Bruce. But I do think that we can learn from other MDBs. And I think that's something that I know Bruce is looking at, and we certainly, from the accountability mechanism side, we want to also learn from other MDBs that have broadened the scope the range of issues that they cover as safeguard issues where there is a level of accountability that can trigger a compliance review. So I do think that's the key question, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Yeah, if I may come in now, Erin, after to Warren. Firstly, thank you so much, Ryan Hassan, for breaking the ice. It's always good to get us started, and it was a great question. A few things just to complement what Warren has said. Firstly, the existing policy, we have these three areas of environment, involuntary resettlement, and Indigenous people safeguards. And under the new policy, you can expect to see all of those areas covered. There will be some differences, though, in terms of the way the policy might be structured, and there may also be some new areas in the context of the policy. So just to unpack those a little bit. One, in terms of structure, we're looking at a policy architecture that would be a bit more similar in terms of the coverage in what you see in, say, the World Bank's Environmental and Social Framework, or the IFC performance standards, or the EBRD's performance requirements. Largely involuntary resettlement, Indigenous people safeguards, we've got those as separate standards like we have now, but environment is more unpacked, and you develop individual standards that would cover areas such as biodiversity, cultural heritage, for example, health and safety. They're things that we have in the policy already, but we're looking at giving them more definition and detail within separate standards. So just to sort of say in a nutshell, you can expect everything that we've got in the existing policy, but with a clearer structure that allows you to look in more depth. The other thing that structurally would be different would be the existing policy does mix a bit responsibilities for ADB as an organization with responsibilities for the borrowers or clients. And we want to have a bit more of a clearer definition of those, actually. So we're looking at having the environmental and social policy that has ADB's commitments and ADB's responsibilities and due diligence very clear. And then the requirements for our sovereign and non-sovereign clients, what do they need to meet? So that should actually help in some respects in terms of accountability, having clearer distinctions of roles and responsibilities. Then there are some elements in terms of the level of detail. We're actually expecting to not have less detail, but actually to provide more clarity. At the moment, the safeguard policy statement is built around these policy principles that are useful, but often they do lack detail. And that's sometimes been an issue when it has come to accountability is what does a certain provision in the policy actually mean? How is it implemented in practice? So we'd like to give some more clarity to some of those aspects. And then last thing to mention, just in terms of coverage, yeah, there will be some new areas. And this would certainly be something that would then mean the accountability mechanism, for example, the compliance review panel and the makeup of the panel and the expertise in terms of what it covers may need to change. For example, we're looking at having a dedicated standard on labour and working conditions. So, that's something that would come into the policy new. We're also looking at a more in-depth focus on gender. We're also wanting to have a broader consideration of vulnerable and disadvantaged groups. And so that will bring in some new considerations as well. Climate change dimensions, we'll be doing a consultation on that soon. You'll see more details there. So there would be a broader scope, and that would have implications as well for accountability. So yeah, I think certainly similarities, the base will be there, but some new and emerging issues that will need to be considered as well. Thank you. Pass back to you, Erin.
Yeah, thank you, Warren and Bruce. Unless anyone else wants to comment on this question, I have a couple of more hands. Yeah, Ryan just wanted to add my 2 bits to this question, that In addition to the safeguards policy, compliance officers also look at a few other policies of the bank, like incorporation of social and gender issues, and a few other policies. And also safeguard policies have gendered angles as well. So so it's currently also it's much wider than the safeguards policy, but mostly complaints come under the safeguards policies. And rest of the issue has been amply addressed by Bruce. I will now hand over the question to Aromi Pereira. Apologies. Oh, sorry, Babette, you go ahead first with your comment.
Just wanted to add that, yeah, no matter what, I mean, the way it stands now, I mean, no matter what eventually the safeguards policy will cover, if complaints are raised about it, then CRP will review it, though, and in relation to the policies that are subject to compliance, no matter how few or how numerous they are. Yeah, so just that clarification. Even without the updating of the AM for now, because it's really ADB, as you pointed out, Irum, it's not just the safeguards policy. We're also looking at access to information, gender, social benefits, and others. Thank you.
Thank you, Babette. Yeah, Romy Pereira, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, but over to you for your question.
Yes, thank you so much. Hi, I'm Romy Pereira. I'm with the Banking Information Center. I'm really sorry I can't put my camera on today. I'm based in Sri Lanka, where you've probably heard that we're having marathon power cuts. So we're having one right now, so the connectivity is a little poor on my end. So I had two comments, brief comments and a question. One comment is regarding the pre-project baseline data that was spoken about during the presentation. I'm sure those of you from ADB have seen the two documents, the policy briefs that we've shared with you before, and I'm happy to put the links in the chat as well after this so that our civil society colleagues can see it. But basically, some of the recommendations that we had made for the safeguard updates was regarding this pre-project baseline data collection and about adding sections where you disaggregate based on more vulnerabilities. So for example, collect separate data on persons with disabilities, disaggregate by age so that you have a better idea of impacts on children and so on, and to be clearly differentiated impacts and vulnerabilities, and then that can be tracked throughout the project cycle. So that was my comment on the baseline data. My other comment is on the grievance redress mechanism, and again connected to our policy briefs before about making the GRM child-friendly and also more accessible to persons with disabilities. And this includes materials that are shared regarding the project being accessible to persons with disabilities in the formats and support that they require for a meaningful participation. And finally, a comment on reprisals. I was wondering if someone from the ADB team could speak a little bit about your plans for incorporating maybe a contextual risk assessment into the GRM or into the project. How do you hope to address the issue of reprisals across the GRM? And linked to this is also what you spoke about earlier with regard on awareness raising about the GRM and accessing it. Just purely based on our experience on ADB and World Bank projects in Sri Lanka, one issue that we see is that most project affected communities most of the time don't even know who the funder is. They don't know whether it's ADB or World Bank. They deal only with project officials, whether it's from an urban development authority or a road development authority. And then even when material is shared, there's no information about the independence of these mechanisms. And most of the time, the issues that they face are directly to do with the government officials that they are dealing with. So if they're not assured of the independence of the mechanism, or if it's the same institution that is running the GRM, people are not likely to go and complain to them. So, and including experiences we've had even in 2019 with communities being resettled in Colombo, where it was being funded by ADB, but nobody knew it was ADB funded because they were dealing with railway authorities. And baseline data was being collected for the resettlement action plan, but people didn't know why their data was being collected. They just knew that there was a resettlement in the works. So just a note there about sort of more robust and comprehensive awareness sharing, and I think active participation of ADB officials in these processes, so that that level of independence and lack of reprisals can be assured at a project level. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Romy. I think very valuable comments and your question as well. Ryan, I note that you have a follow-up question. I will just come back to you after we address Romy's question so that we kind of close every question properly. And thank you, Bruce, for reminding me that. Over to you, Bruce. I think you can take Romy's question, or Babette, sorry, did you want to take the...
Just the two things. One is we raised this issue about the need for very comprehensive pre-project baseline data, and we couldn't agree with you more on the importance of actually disaggregating that as much as we can, so that we fully understand the impacts across different people, because people will be differently impacted, and that will also then help us design the intervention appropriately. We actually saw the value of this in the project in Cambodia, because as I mentioned, over 800 families were resettled and into different resettlement sites. So the matching, there was not enough data about them for you to match. Who are those who are working, and therefore which resettlement area are near workplaces where they can get employment, who among them have their own small businesses, and things like that, so that the interventions could really be more targeted. And maybe just a small thing on the last point that you raised, Irumi, on that affected communities don't even know that the AMs exist. Maybe just to share with them what we've been working on, Bruce, Warren, and Irum, with management and legal of ADB, to actually have this included in the loan covenant itself, that part of the responsibility of the borrower is to make the affected communities aware of the existence of the independent accountability mechanisms. And we will help prepare those materials that are to be then disseminated. On top of that, we're looking at mobilizing the accountability mechanism focal persons for the resident missions, so that they can also help with this awareness raising. Over to you, Bruce and Warren, for the other questions.
Yeah, thanks, Babette. Warren, let's hear from you.
Okay, I was just going to mention one thing, and Romy, thanks for sending the policy brief. I think it's important to recognize that the GRMs will not involve the ADB colleagues. I mean, that's the, once implementation is undertaken of a project, the ADB is arm's length, and whether we think that's right or not, that's reality, and we can't do it any other way, quite frankly. I think what needs to happen, and we've seen this in Sri Lanka, we looked at one case where in one district, the GRM was working extremely well for the same project. In the next district, it was a disaster. And it had a lot to do with who was on the GRM. And I think that what ADB needs to do is to pay a whole lot more attention to what the GRM composition is, make sure that local communities are adequately represented, that project affected people, if you need disabilities better represented, that you have that. So it's a representation issue on the GRM, and then it's an understanding that the GRM is available. and to the project affected people. And then finally, I think that where we have fallen short in a big way, and Babette mentioned this, is somehow linking the awareness that a GRM is available to project affected people to the fact that the accountability mechanism is also available to project affected people. We have not made that linkage very well. And this is work in progress, and I hope that in the next several months, and as a result of the partly as a result of the work that Bruce and his team are doing on the safeguard update, that we'll get better at this. But these are all valid issues that do come up over and over again, and we have to focus on the composition, the training of the GRM members, and the monitoring by ADB that the GRM is working, and that the GRM does enable people to, that people are aware of it, and that it enables people to know that they can also come to ADB to the accountability mechanism. Thank you.
Thanks, Warren. Bruce, do you want to comment on the reprisal question?
Yes, thanks, Irma. I'm trying to quickly cover a few points. I know my last response to Ryan was a little lengthy, but I think for this session, as we're quite fortunate to have Warren and Babette here, it's really good to take their views and recommendations, and I'm trying to keep mine a little shorter. You get to hear from me almost every week. So yes, can I just quickly run through a couple of points? I couldn't agree with you more, Irami, on the differentiated assessment and data on different groups and vulnerabilities. That's clearly important. And absolutely on the GRM side, Warren's spoken a little bit about some of the things that we need to see there, but I agree with you that they need to be accessible. And you've mentioned child-friendly, persons with disabilities, and I think a range of other groups tailored to the local context and culture. So that's something that we need to integrate and make clear in the policy. Awareness raising that is already focused on. So then let me come to the reprisals question. So firstly, what we have in the existing policy, the linkage to reprisals explicitly, I would say, only really comes up in the definition of meaningful consultation that says it should be, without coercion or intimidation. Of course, reprisals is a more extreme expression of that. And that's certainly not something that we would want to see happening in any of the project contexts. Moving forward, I'm recommending, and it's something we need to discuss more with our team and with management, but I'm recommending that we have a more clear position on reprisals and, a commitment against reprisals. And of course, we will then need further operational guidance within ADB as to how to take that forward. Then, of course, the risks that coercion, intimidation, reprisals could occur needs to be assessed in the context of projects. And we are looking at, apart from our screening and categorization process, we're looking at adding an additional contextual risk assessment, which would look at things like the borrower's capacity, commitment, and track record, but also would look at these broader issues. Is it taking place in a fragile or conflict-affected situations? Are there cases or allegations of intimidation or reprisals occurring, which you would need to be sensitive to in terms of the design of the project, the way that you formulate engagement with stakeholders and the monitoring of those? So they are certainly things that we're looking at and we need to give expression to in the new policy. So thank you.
Thanks a lot, Bruce. Aromi, I hope that your questions have been answered. Regarding reprisal, just wanted to add from SPS side, Bruce has given a very good detailed answer. But from AM side, there is, you all know, there's an independent accountability mechanism network. And that network together, all colleagues are really working hard to come up with risk assessment tools when it comes to accountability, as well as reprisal guidelines, just to guide ourselves that how to handle these sensitive matters when we are in the field. So this is an area we are really, it's a very challenging area, but we are also at our end looking at it. And you also raised a fantastic comment about differently abled people, child-friendly, and as Bruce said, there are many other areas. And in our last annual meeting of the Independent Accountability Mechanisms, I think CSOs raised this question that why are these policies only providing binary definitions of male and female? We now need to broaden our policies also to encourage different gender identity people to come forward, and that is the first way of breaking the barrier. And then so just wanted, Iromi, are your questions answered, or would you want to ask a follow-up? Okay, good. Before I come to you, Ashley, let me go back to Ryan. He had a follow-up question, as he indicated in the chat box, so that we can address Ryan's question fully. Over to you, Ryan.
Thank you. And I'll keep this brief and bring everyone's attention to the issue of the centrality of information disclosure, and especially project-related information disclosure, to both the safeguards as well as accountability mechanism. Two things which came up in previous inputs, especially from the ADB side, is that one, you guys admit, and fairly so, and we see this in our experience, that local GRMs are not working. And one of the fundamental reasons that they're not working is, first, they're just not visible. The other thing is, if you look at most of the issues which have led to complaints, are lack of meaningful consultation and lack of information disclosure to local communities. Now, if you are going to look at the existing provisions of information disclosure in the SPS 2009, it's quite clear there that you have to release information in a time-bound manner and meaningfully consult the most vulnerable groups. And then if that is not done so, then you can hold the project in non-compliance and bring it back to compliance. If you try to dig into the new access to information policy and look for that same provision, the new information disclosure policy has removed that from the main policy and has, I think, etched it somewhere in the operational guidelines, the operational manual charter, or staff instructions as it's called. And that's a lot of digging around to actually find it, even though that is compliant language for accountability mechanism. But for the layperson trying to figure things out from the local community, it's a needle in a haystack. So my question is back to, I guess, the new safeguards policy. How do you look at the language on information disclosure? And it would be great to hear your views on whether that relates to the effectivity of the accountability mechanism moving forward.
Thanks, Ryan. Before I go to Bruce, whether Warren or Babette have any comments? Otherwise, I'll go to Bruce to take this question.
No, I don't have I just want to make one thing clear. We have, Ryan, I mean, we have a lot of successful operations of GRMs. So, you know, the complaints that we get are a relatively small percentage of the total number of projects ADB has. And in almost all of those, indeed, the GRM is not working very well. But I think that in the work that we've done on GRM case studies, we found a number of cases where a lot of projects, and particularly it's kind of sector and country based, where they figured it out, where they understand what needs to be done, and they have very, very successful GRM. So I only wanted to make that point, that we do have the positive examples as well as the negative. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Ryan. And a couple of perspectives. One, it might be good to sit with you and unpack a little bit in terms of where you see some of the issues with the existing access to information policy. But two things to say now. One is the provisions in the safeguard policy statement at the moment, of course, still apply in full. And that of course gives you the basis for looking at accountability in the context of information disclosure and whether it's done or not. Of course, there are key documents in the policy that are mandatory to disclose, but I think one of the issues that needs to be looked at in a little bit more detail is how do you make effective disclosures to local people? There's things that are clear to be disclosed on our website, like assessment reports and the timeliness of those, monitoring reports, etc. And there are things like monitoring reports that we strive to improve on and make sure we receive them from clients in a timely manner. But this whole issue of local disclosure and what's appropriate at that level in language and forms that are understandable to people. It's not about, as we've discussed before, having an EIA sitting in a project office that no one knows about or can access easily. It has to be in that form that they can access. And I think that's something that we can look at in terms of clearer language in the policy moving forward on information disclosure. But of course, then we need, really to follow through with the operational procedures to make sure that's being adapted in project context. But I'd be very interested to unpack with you a bit more what you see as some of the issues with the access to information policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Ryan, I know you've been raising this access to information question for, in a lot of avenues. And we really hope that SPS team sits with you and, unpack, as Bruce said. But anything in addition to what you've just asked before I move on to the next question, Ryan?
No, I think you'd rather move on to the next question. I can always write in the chat box if something comes up. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. So Ashley, you wrote in the chat box that you would want to speak and ask a question, but you could not raise your hand. So over to you, Ashley.
Thank you, Iram. And I just wanted to ask a question on reprisals, and thank you, Irami, for raising that issue as well. And my question is, how is the accountability mechanism going to interact with the bank around the reprisal risks? Do you have any plans, or is it already established?
Yeah, thank you, Ashley. Babette, Warren, who would want to go first in light of our discussions with the management on this reprisal issues and all, to respond to Ashley's question?
So the question is, I'm not real clear what the question is. Can you kind of capture that again? Sorry.
Ashley, if I correctly understand the question, it's about if reprisal takes place during the AM procedure, accountability mechanism investigations process, then how does it interact with the bank, or how does it take care of that? Was that your question, or the other ways around?
Yes, Iram.
Okay.
That's great.
Okay. So in up to now, when there are potential reprisal issues that we judge are serious enough that they could affect people's safety or livelihood or other issues, when they're with with OSPF, then we go to the Office of Anti-Corruption and Integrity immediately, and they're better equipped to look at these issues and to support us in investigating that risk. If it's something that is less substantial, it's pressure from government agencies to accept compensation for assets or land, then we intervene in a facilitation role to try and stop that and make it very clear through our operational colleagues and others that the implementing agency that's not acceptable. And that has happened in many, many cases. So when complainants for OSPF say, we're feeling pressure, we're feeling harassed, we're feeling threatened, but it's not something that they see as a physical or financial threat that's serious, then we intervene in our facilitation role to make it clear to the executing agency, the borrower, the private sector entity, that that's not acceptable and has to be stopped right now, or we will have to stop the facilitation process. So there are different, it depends on the severity of it. And so far it's been project by project. It has happened in a few cases, and in a few cases we have had to go to our Office of Anti-Corruption and Integrity. So I think this is something that I hope, as Babette mentioned, we have our own internal process, or I guess Iram, you mentioned that we have internal processes, but that's not enough. And I think that ADB needs a better set of guidance on this that's across the institution. Very, very good question. Thank you.
Yeah.
Babette, please.
Yeah. I just wanted to add that, if issues on reprisal are brought up to us in the process of the conduct of our investigations, then we bring it up with management and remind the operations department to protect the APs who may be subject to this, to reprisal retaliation, and then they take it on. But we've seen that it really, as Bruce earlier mentioned, that this has to be further elaborated in the policy to actually provide guidance to everyone in ADB itself. And so in a particular case that we investigated, the operations department then also discussed it with OAI. And that's where it's so similar to, in a sense, what Warren mentioned. But so far, we've only encountered this very seldom, no? Twice, I think. Thank you. Yeah, but we see that this is very important. By the way, just to mention that we have a very simple guidance on retaliation, which the CRP had put together with inputs from OGC during the term of my predecessor.
Yeah, thank you, Babette. I was just about to jump in to say that. But as Babette said, those guidelines are very simple, very preliminary level, because we also are not, the CRP or the SPF are not experts in reprisal risk area. So we kind of are in negotiations with all other MDBs, AMs, and trying to learn ourselves how to best handle. But our guidelines are very simple, but very helpful. For instance, what venue should be chosen. For instance, if you want to really encourage people coming, then don't hold meetings in a hotel or ADB office where everyone can see who is coming. Go to them to speak. These kinds of things wherever there is a risk of reprisal. So we have guidelines. We are in negotiations and conversations with Bruce and rest of the management that ADB-wide guidelines and help comes in on this reprisal. So thank you, Ashley. That was a good question. Is your question answered, Ashley, or would you want to have a follow-up on this?
Oh, that's answered. Thank you. I don't believe I introduced myself. I'm Ashley from the Coalition of Human Rights and Development. I joined them recently.
Great. Thank you. So I still hear more from our colleagues and less from you all. So please raise hands, come in. We want to really hear from you. Those of our colleagues who have not yet spoken, quietly sitting, how can I interest you to speak? Should I use my biology teacher's method and give a cold call? Anyone from our CSO colleagues? We have a wide range of expertise in our audience, and it will be a shame if we do not learn. Yeah, as Bruce says, we are happy to stay longer. Mark Forder, thank you for raising your hand. Over to you, Mark.
I'm a colleague of Ashley's, also with the Coalition for Human Rights and Development, and I know the reprisal issue has been raised a couple of times, but there was one thing that, especially because we're discussing safeguards review here, what would when we're talking about this, and it was great to hear from the accountability mechanism side of things that it needs to be more elaborated, this response and how that works. But I would be interested in hearing what this means in terms of the safeguards. Because I assume this is an interaction between the two, that this would have some implications for the safeguards. Yeah. So how the bank is going to respond. We heard about assessment, but does that mean in terms of response and basically, yeah, what it means from the safeguard side of things is the question. Thanks.
Bruce, would you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks, Mark, for prompting us to speak a little bit more on that. So, yeah, like with the accountability mechanism, when they have cases, we also have issues that are raised in the context of projects. I would say not too frequently, but when they do occur, there's something that certainly our colleagues in the operations departments and management, and particularly with our country offices or resident missions, as we call them, take it seriously and look at having discussions with the government or appropriate parties, while also seeking to protect and maintain confidentiality around the people involved. But at the moment, apart from in the context of our anti-corruption and integrity policy, and then we have an office that's involved in doing assessments and investigations around that. Apart from that policy, which does have clear provisions around whistleblower protection, that's already enshrined in our policies. There is not this sort of wider policy framework, and something that I would like to see is one to have some very explicit, a very explicit position of ADB in terms of no tolerance for reprisals under any circumstances. And that's our policy commitment, but I think it also needs to be clear within the standards, particularly the standard around stakeholder engagement and meaningful consultation and grievance redress mechanisms. There's also linkages out to other aspects of the policy. For example, we're looking at having a standard on labour and working conditions. So this also relates to workers having the rights to make complaints about various different issues in an environment that's free of intimidation or reprisals. So we'd like to have some clear statements. But I think building on what Iram had said earlier, it's really the operational guidance that also needs to be very well developed here. And this can be the very challenging issue, because we might be very concerned about an issue, but then to be able to take it, say, through to a government or other actors, we need some protocols in that give our project teams, our resident missions, clear guidance in terms of how to do that. Also, another aspect that we have to explore is who is best placed in the organisation to do investigations. That's an issue. So at the moment, we're using the Office of Anti-Corruption and Integrity to do that. But we have to explore that further in the context of the new safeguard policy and say, well, is that the best place to embed that type of investigation and whistleblower protection, or some other aspect? So that's another thing that we need to explore. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Mark, have we answered your question and your concern?
Well, there is one issue that obviously better than anyone else, but that the Office of Anti-Corruption and Integrity, their policy basically cannot be reviewed under compliance. So if they do not act, and we have seen a case where they did not act on a reprisal in Uzbekistan recently, although we've had independent embassies like the US and European saying it was related to an ADB project, they determined that it was not. This would be a situation where my apologies. Yes, my apologies. I will start again. So my apologies, I forgot about interpretation. So I wanted to just raise the issue that the Office of Anti-Corruption and Integrity is not covered by the accountability mechanism. So if there is non-compliance with their policy, that will not be reviewed. And we have a case, a recent case in Uzbekistan, where we did, where there was an identified reprisal that was linked by embassies such as the EU delegation or the US embassy, linked to an ADB project, but the Office for Anti-Corruption and Integrity determined that it was not. So it was a situation where if there would be some accountability for this, some way we could be challenging that. But for the moment right now, we have it in a unit that falls outside any compliance review. So this is something that really is, I mean, with this concrete case, I was bringing it up to show that it can be problematic. So it would be important for us who are concerned about reprisals that this issue is under some policy that can be for which the ADB can be held accountable if there are issues with its implementation. And apologies again to the interpreters. I am really sorry about that.
Bruce, do you want to comment on this?
Yeah, might be something that Warren or Babette would like to come in as well, yeah, from the accountability side. I personally was not aware about that linkage where not subject to accountability, but of course that office does function also in somewhat of an independent role to undertake these investigations in confidence, but they don't have the same level of independence in the way that the accountability mechanism does in terms of the reporting line directly over to the board instead of through to management. So that is, you know, one aspect, but can certainly explore that more, and I'm interested to have some discussions with colleagues to look at that issue. I think ultimately what you need to be able to have is a body that can thoroughly investigate these types of issues and then provide advice to management, and actionable advice to management, as well as support to people that have complained or whistleblowers so that they get the adequate level of protection. But I think it is somewhat complex sometimes to get to a determination as to, you know, the linkage with ADB or how to appropriately take things forward, you know, without going into details. And certainly, as far as I'm aware, in that particular case that you were referring to, our resident mission did have discussions also with parties at the country level around that, but I'm not able to go into further detail. So yeah, it's a complex area. So thank you for raising it, and definitely happy to look into it. So thank you, Mark. And apologies again for the translation. Please do let us know. We all need to keep that awareness of speaking slowly. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Warren, do you want to come in on OAI not being subject to SPS, oh, sorry, AM?
Well, I actually wasn't, you know, I was only aware that that OSPF is not subject to OCRP. So this is news to me as well. So which you know, I kind of find as a blessing. You know, I think that we need to be able to have independent reviews of every element of ADB's operations, but we need to also be able to retain a certain level of independence, and so I can understand the logic behind that. I do think that we've had, what I can say is the same thing Bruce said. We've had a number of cases that are really, really difficult to make it crystal clear that issues related to a project, related to a complaint, were directly related to an ADB project. It's not always that clear, and so I can understand. I don't know about this case, but I can imagine that kind of a situation. But I guess my advice is that we are governed by our board of directors, and if there are issues like this that appear to be more than one-off situations, then I would encourage you to go through your board member or members and encourage them to take a hard look at whether we have the right kind of oversight for dealing with these issues. So that's the best I can do on this one. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Warren. And Mark, thank you. That was a very interesting. So yes, clearly anti-corruption and integrity are not within the mandate of accountability mechanism in the bank, because I think one reason is that the mandate of accountability mechanism policy is to investigate ADB's non-compliance and not anyone else's. And if integrity or anti-corruption or fraud related matters are against ADB, then of course a specialist who can investigate into such matters is OAI department, a separate department. So it's a thin line. I think Warren's suggestion is the best solution at this point in time, that the matter can be escalated to the nominee director of the particular country, and then he or she can look into why the integrity issue was not dealt with or what happened, and then redirect it or direct it to the concerned department in the bank. So that's for now. Mark, hopefully, I mean, I know that it's not a satisfactory answer, but that is how it is divided. The mandate is divided in the bank. That OAI is similarly, accountability mechanism policy does not look into procurement related matters, because that's a contractual liability being looked at by a separate department, and it's not a policy issue. So Mark, any follow up on that before I move on to the next area? So Mark says, to be clear, I was not arguing that OAI should be under the accountability. I was arguing that appraisal response should also be under the safeguards to allow for compliance review of how the bank is responding to reprisals. Got it. Yeah. So bank-wide reprisal, yeah, thanks, Mark, for your follow-up. Yes, as Bruce earlier said, bank-wide guidelines for reprisal and risk assessment are under consideration, and Bruce's team has kind of promised that they will look into it and come up with guidelines. But right now, SPS update is keeping them so occupied that this has also been happening on the side. We already, as in accountability mechanism offices, have reprisal guidelines, but we really need to firm them up and make them, potent enough to deal with this serious issue. So, Mark, these questions are duly noted. I know Ryan has asked a few follow-up questions in the chat box, and I can give him the floor. But before I do that, may I request, we have a member of academia in our group from Armenia, if I correctly read. We also have WWF from Pakistan. Any colleague from WWF Pakistan wants to come in and comment at this point in time? Or our professor from Armenia? I don't want to take names. Definitely not discouraging you, Ryan, but just trying to encourage a more diverse range of colleagues. I'm also browsing through my windows in case anyone has raised hand and I've missed. Okay. All right, I have been told to speak slowly. I'm sorry. No question from any other colleague from other countries. We have quite a lot of participants from Bangladesh. And I know Bangladesh civil society is very, very active as well. Okay, Ryan, your question regarding scope of SPS as well as FIs. You may take the floor, please.
Thank you. Sorry, I've been hogging the space, but just using the opportunity because others are not speaking up. So on financial intermediaries, I think if you look at the IED evaluation reports around safeguards, you realize that financial intermediary borrowers have not been responsible in self-reporting their safeguards requirements. And the staggering data which IED put up is most, if not all of the financial intermediaries have failed to put up their safeguards requirements. So when our concern would then be, how do you identify a safeguards violation when the FI has not reported? So this leads to the second question, which is the problem-solving function specifically. How is their experience in dealing with FIs and problem-solving around FI issues, if at all? It would be great to listen to Warren if he has any cases in mind where OSPF was triggered around FI sub-projects. So that's the question around FIs primarily. So the question is also related to FIs in the sense it's a time frame issue. So if you go back and forth on an FI sub-project trying to find information from the bank or from the borrower, by the time you actually get the information, there is, and we felt this in a particular case that we filed, that the eligibility of filing a complaint at CRP, we lost it by a couple of months, mainly because we just couldn't trace it back to the ADB and trace it back to the borrower because of lack of information. The second question that I had outside FIs is about the scope of the SPS in general. And we're trying to, we've had experiences on technical assistance projects which had ramifications on local communities. We've seen it in the Samoa project on land acquisition and how land reform was being triggered by technical assistance in the Constitution. And there was a complaint filed, CRP found it eligible, eventually BCRC found it ineligible. I think there is another concern over technical assistance projects leading to waste to energy incinerator investment in Cebu, Philippines, which violates constitutional protections against incinerators. I mean, there's an incinerator ban in the Philippines. So will the new SPS ensure that technical assistance is also under the ambit of the safeguards and under the ambit of the accountability mechanism? So yeah, those are my 2 points.
Thank you, Ryan. Who would want to respond? Warren, I see.
Well, I'll respond to the first question because asked specifically about OSPF on FIs. We actually have not received any complaints on FIs, and it's kind of surprising. But since I've been here, which is going on 4.5, 5 years now, all of the complaints that we have received have been on projects, not FIs. Having said that, being an old safeguard person, I think that it's one of the big challenges, and I'm glad that Bruce and his team are taking this on seriously, because I think it's going to be increasingly important that we figure out how to have a level of accountability upstream and downstream when we're doing FI lending. But I think Bruce is better equipped to talk about what they're thinking about. But for OSPF, we haven't had any cases during my time, and I don't think there were any before my time. Thanks.
Thanks, Warren. Bruce, would you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you. No, as far as I'm aware, there's also not been any complaints through OSPF on financial intermediaries. There have been one to OCRP, though. I see, Babette, you came in there. Did you want to speak first before I talk about other issues?
Yeah, yes, Bruce. I mean, I just wanted to set the facts straight. Ryan, actually, in terms of in the case of the Samoa complaint, it's not that the BCRC did not find it eligible. They did not agree to proceed to a compliance review because the TA was still ongoing, and they felt that there was opportunity for the project to still address the concern of the complainants in the way the law was being crafted. Just to set that, just to clarify that. Thank you. Back to you, Bruce.
Thank you, Babette. So yeah, two parts to the question there. So on the financial intermediaries, we are looking at this separately, and we're preparing some background analysis which will feed into a consultation that we'll be holding on financial intermediaries. I think in April, we're scheduling that one. There are issues certainly around the disclosure of the environmental and social management plans that some financial intermediaries, particularly ones, commercial banks, for commercial confidentiality reasons, prefer not to disclose, but that's something that we have to look at carefully. And I understand your point very clearly around being able to understand what those systems are and whether they're indeed compliant. Certainly on the ADB side, we do audits of the financial intermediary systems. We do gap analysis. We ensure that those systems are brought up to something complementary equivalent to the ADB systems. And that is reported on in terms of ADB's loan documentation, the assessments of the existing systems and the requirements to bring those into place. The other issue, though, is on the monitoring and getting that monitoring down to the real sub-project level, because we do need to see cascading requirements. We're not trying to absolve the application of the policy. It does need to cascade down. So, of course, the accountability mechanism would then apply down through those. But as you move from a further distance from the ADB and with other sub-borrowers, it gets increasingly hard to then implement follow-up. So it's certainly an issue that we recognise and one that we're having a further look at. I don't yet have a firm response in terms of how we're looking to address that, because we're doing some further studies. On the scope of the policy and the coverage of the technical assistance, so I think as Babette has said already, the accountability mechanism would certainly apply. From the safeguards side, yes, the scope of the new policy, we need to consider how technical assistance is covered. It is a bit different in terms of the purpose of technical assistance is usually to provide capacity and knowledge support. However, there are some technical assistance that can include small-scale pilot activities. In those cases, we do already ask for further review, and we've got within our internal operational procedures requirements that they should not be triggering safeguards, so they need to be category C. So that's something we do look at. Also, we have to appreciate that where some technical assistance might be providing some consulting services to a government, it's quite different to a wider approach for policy-based lending. But that's where we have to carefully look at, what actually is that technical assistance going to do, and I appreciate that in some cases there could be some issues. So it's something that we're discussing at the moment to see how we could address that in the new policy context. So thanks again, Ryan. We need to come back to that one.
Thanks, Bruce. Thank you very much. Ryan, do you have any follow-up on this? I see you've written in the chat box already.
No, I think the message in the chat box is basically appreciating Warren's response and Ma'am Babette's clarification as well. And just going back to Warren's response, it's quite clear that OSPF not facing FI sub-project issues is basically there's just no way for local communities to raise them because the information's not there. And that's worth thinking about, I think, both from the SPS side as well as the mechanism side. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ryan, on that. Yes, Bruce, please.
Yeah, no, just a quick follow-up. It's a good point. Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, in fact, Ryan, you know, is it indicative of the fact that there's no issues, or the fact that we're, you know, people are not being able to bring complaints forward for a range of reasons? So there's one thing that we are looking at there in this context. Babette had mentioned earlier that we're looking at changing our standard loan covenants to provide a requirement that the borrower assist us in channeling information about the accountability mechanism through to project affected people and linkages to the grievance redress mechanisms. We've got a flag in our process also to look at language that could go with financial intermediaries, but that's something that's still under discussion at the moment, needs to be developed further. But you know, certainly aware of that issue. It needs to cascade down, and I think that's the greater challenge with the financial intermediaries. So we need to look further at that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Bruce. I was about to come in on that covenant as well. Zeham Khan, I think you raised your hand, but then it disappeared. Did you have a question? Okay, if not, then we are almost there in terms of time. So let me open the chat box. Sure. Anuradha, you have a question. Would you like to ask it yourself, or should I just read it in the chat box?
Hi, can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes.
Hi, I'm from Center for Financial Accountability. It's based in India. My question is more specific in terms of the timelines one has with regards to accountability mechanism processes and the accountability processes. And this is also coming from ground experiences of engaging with accountability mechanism and redressal mechanisms of various projects, be it CRP or be it the local level or the resident mission interactions with the resident mission. So we have seen wherever there has been a recognition of problems also, in case of any retaliation, there is a abrupt end in the engagement process. Even if you look at the accountability mechanism processes itself, after remedial plans are made, the monitoring has extended up to almost 7 or 8 years. This is an unending process, making no sense for communities on ground who have engaged for so many long years. So is there any discussion or conversations on how do you bring closures and how do you fix accountability in terms of timelines? Because endless timelines mean really nothing for communities. Thank you.
Thanks, Anuradha. I think that's a very good question. Babette, do you want to take this?
Yeah. Anuradha, actually in the policy, what's provided is we have the mandate to monitor implementation of the remedial actions to bring the project back to compliance up to 3 years from the time the RAP is approved by the board. in the old policy that was actually 5 years. But as you pointed out, we actually have one case where we continue to monitor even beyond the 5-year period, because that was still under the old policy. And it's really, in that sense, a decision of the board to mandate us to continue to monitor until the project is actually brought to compliance. But on the other hand, we do see, and this will then feed, not now in the SPS updating, but maybe in the AM updating, that when remedial actions require prior technical studies to actually inform what then the concrete action should be, maybe it shouldn't be a set 3-year monitoring period. You know, so you provide a period when studies are to be done, which is to be done, of course, in consultation with all the stakeholders. Once the results are out and the actions are then, the actual actions that are needed to remedy whatever are the findings of the study are actually identified and approved by the board, then you have the monitoring period of the actual implementation. But that's still something down the line because, as mentioned, a decision on the AM updating we expect will come after the SPS updating itself. But you're right, for people who are affected, the important thing is actions are done right away. And that's what, that's the beauty of problem solving in that sense, because problem solving is able to act immediately to solve the particular issues that have been raised to them. On the other hand, for compliance review, we're looking at the compliance of ADB with its own policies and procedures, and not just the focus, of course, on the issues that have been raised by the complaint, applicable to the entire project itself. So yeah, so that's where it stands right now. We understand your concern.
Thank you, Babette, and thank you, Anuradha. Yeah, as Babette said, that policy does provide a timeline, though it's not set in stone. And for a reason, I think it's not set in stone. Of course, it has pros and cons. Cons, as you mentioned, and pros are like in this given pandemic situation, there was a project which we were supposed to wrap up last year, but because of COVID situation, RAP action plans could not be implemented on the ground because everything was on a standstill. So we ourselves requested the board to give us another year to monitor because nothing is moving this year. So those kinds of unexpected situations are helpful if policy provides some loophole. I mean, deadlines are not, but yes, immediate respond in terms of implementing actions is the key here. With that, I would like to bring this session to an end unless my colleagues at ADB or at CSO has anything really burning. We have exceeded time already, but before I hand over to Azim, and in the meantime, anyone can give me a shout, I wanted to thank you all for joining us today and making this really process helpful for us, because you give us so many food for thoughts. Apologies if we could not answer any question to your satisfaction, because this is a learning process for both of us. And we pick up a lot of threads from your conversations, from your questions, and we try to then, think about those and then feed them into our update process or consultations process or learning process. So thank you all, extremely helpful. Till we meet again, I hand over to Azim.
Thank you so much for that, Iram. And as you mentioned, let me echo your thanks and gratitude to all of the stakeholders and informants for directing, providing input, feedback, their insightful comment, the clarity of the questions and the sharing of experiences, as well as the constructive feedback on the review and the updating of the safeguards policy statement. So thank you, Iram. Thank you, Warren, Babette, Bruce, Madhu, as well as Jennifer, Jelson, the events management, and all of the other people who've been working behind the scenes. But of course, a special thanks to the stakeholders. I want to reiterate that the comments on the accountability mechanism we received from this particular session and other sessions will, of course, as you mentioned, Aaron, be considered in the final revision of the policy statement. But please don't go. We still have a number of participants and have managed to hold interest for this session. Please don't go. On your screen, please give us your feedback, and you will see a Zoom poll flashing on the screen now. There it is. Please rate the satisfaction with today's session on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the most satisfied, to 1 being the least satisfied, and then all other nuances in the middle, of course. Please give us your feedback on how you viewed your satisfaction, the clarity, the level of discourse and engagement in this particular session. And a reminder to the previous question that I raised on Mentee, which you will see flashing in the chat box now. You will see the link to the Mentee poll. If you have specific ideas for how we can improve or increase the level of engagement in these consultations, in 3, 4, 5 sentences, as long or as short as you wish, please provide your feedback. As Iram mentioned, we always know and recognize and appreciate that there's room for improvement, and we're open to suggestions on how specifically these consultations can be improved. The opportunity to let us know on how the improvements can be made are given to you on the Mentee poll, but for now, let's return to the Zoom poll. Kindly quickly give us a rank between 1 to 5, 5 being the highest, 1 being the lowest, on your level of satisfaction with these consultations. And with that, I would like to soon turn over to Director Bruce Dunn of Sustainable Development and Climate Change Division to not only A, summarize, but B, also give us an overview of what we can look forward to between now and, let's say, April. With that, we can see that about 60% of you have given us a score of 4 or better, with a tie of 40% at either highly satisfied or very, very neutral. So as I mentioned, there's obviously room for improvement. We take this room for improvement and these critiques quite constructively. We appreciate the improvements that we can make and want to know specifically how we can do that through the Mentee poll. So with that, let me turn it over to Director Bruce Dunn to summarize and give us a glimpse of what lies ahead. Bruce, if you please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Azim, and thank you indeed for everyone that's joined today and sharing your perspectives and some good and often challenging questions for us to think through. I see from the poll that maybe we've not been able to satisfy everyone in terms of either the approach today or maybe some of the responses. So that's something that we do indeed need to look at. And if you're happy to provide some further recommendations to us through the Mentee or through the evaluation that we'll be sending out to you, then we would certainly welcome that, because we do always strive to learn from the experiences and improve the process. Quick summary in terms of some of the key issues that came up today. Firstly, while the number of complaints have increased over time from the accountability mechanisms, they're still relatively small in terms of the size of the portfolio, but where they do occur, they're obviously of major concern to us and of course to the affected people, and we take all of them very seriously. And in this context, for the policy update, they also provide this very rich learning experience for things that we need to change in the policy or for implementation. We heard today a number of issues that need to be addressed, and I think Warren and Babette had gone through a good summary of those in their presentation, and I won't seek to repeat those, but there were certainly a number of issues that then came up and got reinforced through your questions. I'll just note some of those. One was on strengthening meaningful consultation and stakeholder engagement, including the inclusion of poor and vulnerable groups, and there was specific mention of children, people with disabilities, and of course it extends to a range of other groups. There was also a central issue raised around information disclosure, the timeliness and the quality of information disclosure and to who. And there was also some questions around how that links to the access to information policy. Next, we had some good discussions around grievance redress mechanisms. And for those of you that joined our consultations on stakeholder engagement, we also had a lot of discussions there around grievance redress mechanisms. But some of the key points we heard was certainly they need to be visible, they need to be accessible, they need to be customized for the local context, we need capacity. And I think a fair point that's also been raised several times is GRMs also are a vehicle for people to know that they have access to other mechanisms, including ADB's accountability mechanism. And we had some discussions there about raising awareness and letting people know that, ADB is a financier and they have access to these other processes if the local processes with GRMs are not effective. We also had quite a discussion around the issue of reprisals, which is a very important one and has also come up in the consultations. We had a bit of discussion around how it's addressed in the context of accountability mechanism cases, whether the Anti-Corruption and Integrity Office has a role to play, and also clearly some recommendations that the new safeguard policy needs to look at this, which we certainly agree with. There was also issues around how the scope of the new policy and the structure of the new policy will affect the role and function of the accountability mechanism. We certainly clarified there that the new policy will be fully covered by the accountability mechanism, but there may be some changes in the policy that would require some changes to the mechanism, and that's something that will be considered moving forward. There was also some questions about how the new policy would frame issues around financial intermediaries and the role of accountability in that case, and also for technical assistance. And then at the end, we had some issues, I think a very important one, about the time frame and responsiveness of the accountability mechanism. And I think that points to both the assessment processes in terms of either problem solving or coming to determinations about compliance, but also the monitoring process. And I guess at the end of the day, the key thing we always take home there is that for affected people, you want a quick resolution of these issues. And I think that again points back to the central points of addressing issues through strengthening baseline studies, through meaningful consultation and GRM, because that's always going to be far more effective than these more lengthy processes in the accountability mechanism. They're important, we need to have them, but we need to work at the upstream level. So short space of time, we have covered a range of issues, and all of these we will be taking forward into the policy update process. Then just a few next steps. We will be running further consultations on this same topic for civil society across different time zones. The information is available through our website. We'll be doing sessions actually tomorrow, including for North America. We're also running still a range of these regional consultations on various different thematic topics. So again, please do consult the website for those. We've got ones coming up around climate change, and then I think the next one after that will be around integrated environmental and social assessment. But please do stay tuned for the website, or register if you haven't already for alerts. There are sometimes some changes to the process as we're seeking to get all the materials ready and make sure we can organize these well. So we try to keep everyone up to date with those. And then moving forward, we will be having other consultations, as I said, at the country level and for project affected people. And then this will feed into the preparation of the policy. And we're targeting a draft policy in the second half of this year. The anticipation at the moment is by October, we'll go for some initial discussions with the board around a draft, and that will be released also for public consultations and then more discussion with you. So please do stay tuned for the process, and thank you again for joining today. Until the next time though, please take care. Thank you again.